You ever driven Highway 90 past the Daniel Boone Forest after midnight? The road stretches so long and quiet it feels like it's waiting for you to blink first. The kind of silence that chews at your nerves until every tick of the engine starts sounding like a whisper. My name's not important. The badge was. Kentucky State Police, Unit 117. This is a personal statement, a kind of confession, I guess, because the report I filed about what happened that night was only half the truth. The rest of it, I kept for myself, until now. Dispatch, this is 117, checking status on ghost call. Reference, old ID 214. Repeat, 214. That's how it started. A ghost transmission. A trooper ID that shouldn't have been on air anymore. You see, Unit 214, that was Trooper Harlan Bishop. He vanished in 1998, responding to a stranded motorist near mile marker 23. They found his antenna and half a door decal in the ditch 3 days later. No car, no body. His case file went cold before I ever joined the force. So when that ID lit up the radio again, 20 years later, dispatch thought it was an equipment glitch. I don't know what I thought. Curiosity, maybe. Or maybe something already knew I'd go looking. The night was bone dry, cold enough to keep your breath sitting in the cab with you. You can smell the woods out there. Oak rot, cold iron from creek beds. When the wind dies, it's like the earth's holding its breath. I rolled off the main highway onto the service road. No name, no lights. Just a single reflective post leaning sideways, reading 23. You can feel when you've left the state's grid. GPS froze. Radio hissed. Even the dome light dimmed like it was trying not to be seen. I remember stepping out. My boots hit dirt, not pavement. A fine mist clung to the ground. Low fog, thin like smoke. Somewhere far off an owl cried once and didn't finish. I keyed the mic. Dispatch 117 at mile 23, checking perimeter. Looks like, stay in your vehicle. I froze. It came through on my channel, but the transmission wasn't mine. I looked at the display. Unit 214. It was Bishop's voice. My first thought? Prank. Somebody patching old chatter into a live band, but I'd heard Bishop's voice before in training recordings, and the voice on the radio wasn't a playback. It was answering me. I leaned against the door, just listening. Nothing but air and interference. Then, clear as day, you again. That's all it said, and it said it the way someone does when they're tired of being found. I got back in the cruiser, logged my location without coordinates, just routine check, Highway 90 vicinity. Didn't want dispatch sending anyone. Didn't want them thinking I was spooked. But truth is, I was. The headlights painted the road ahead. Narrow track, black as tar. Trees leaning in like old parishioners at confession. There's something about that kind of night where the darkness looks heavier than the air around it. You feel it pressing back. I inched forward, tires sliding over gravel that turned to dirt, then mud. No sound but the wipers and the hum of the radio. The kind of hum that starts to match your pulse if you let it. Then I saw it. 50 yards ahead, a shimmer of red-blue light, faint, pulsing, like a cruiser's bar flashing underwater. I pulled over, killed my engine. The glow stayed, didn't move, didn't fade. For a moment I thought maybe it was a reflection, my lights bouncing off something slick. But my rig was off. Battery kill engaged. Still the glow pulsed, slow, rhythmic. And then I saw the outline of a second car, same frame as mine, older body style. Paint chipped, glass fogged, no plate. And on the rear quarter panel, faint through the dust, 214. I didn't approach right away. Training says, observe first, approach second, react third. But training doesn't tell you what to do when the air starts to feel thick with sound. Every noise in that hollow, the leaves, the mist, the gravel, it was all tuned to the same low hum, like the world was listening, waiting. I reached for my mic again. Dispatch confirming possible unit vehicle, requesting status on any active.
Stay in your vehicle.
Say again? Then.
You already did.
That's when the light in the other cruiser flickered. Once, twice. Then the dome lamp inside clicked on. There was someone in the driver's seat. Head forward, both hands on the wheel. Still. I stepped out again, slow, measured, voice steady because that's what the academy drills into you. Identify yourself, Kentucky State Police. No movement, no voice, just that soft hum. When I got close enough to see through the glass, I stopped breathing. The driver's seat was occupied, sure, but not by a person. It was wet, soaked through, dripping, like someone had poured a bucket of water into the seat and shaped it into the outline of a man. Uniform, badge, hat, all impressions, no substance. And still, on the radio hooked to that cruiser's dash, the mic keyed itself. Stay in your vehicle. Same voice, same drawl. Only now, it sounded like me. I took one step back. The headlights of the old cruiser flared to life, both beams cutting through fog that hadn't been there a second before. And in that light, I could see something reflected behind me, my own silhouette, hands at my sides. But the reflection's head was turned toward me. Not real, I said. Real, not real. I backed up until my boots hit my own car. The air smelled like rain, only it wasn't raining. My breath hung there, thick, suspended. Then both light bars, mine and his, flashed once together. Red-blue. Then darkness. When the world came back, the other car was gone. No tracks, no mud disturbed. Only the faint hum left in the air. That's when I realized my own cruiser door was still open. And from inside, the radio was keying on its own over and over, a faint loop of my voice. Not the one I use when I'm scared. The one I use in recordings, when I'm trying to sound calm. Dispatch, this is 117, crossing parish line. Repeat, entering restricted area. Except Kentucky doesn't have parishes. That's Louisiana talk. That's when I knew I wasn't hearing Bishop. And it wasn't hearing me. It was repeating, rehearsing, like it was waiting to get my voice right. Not real. Real. Not real. I told myself I'd give it 10 more minutes and then log it as a false alarm. 10 minutes to prove I wasn't spooked by fog and a dead man's call sign. 10 minutes to walk the perimeter, check the culvert, put eyes on anything that could bounce a reflection back at me and make my brain play chase with itself. I left the driver door open so I could hear the radio if it keyed again. The dome light pooled on the mud like weak tea. I took the mag light, swept the shoulder. Gravel gave way to hard pan where tires had cut ruts deep enough to drink. On the right, a drainage ditch widened into a black mouth. Beyond that, the trees tightened, thin trunks like matchsticks, bark silvery in the beam. 117, I said for the recorder I wasn't sure I'd turned on. Vicinity of mile marker 23. Investigating possible abandoned vehicle. I stopped. The words felt like trying to nail smoke to a board. I coughed it into something flatter. Area check only. The sound in that cut is wrong at night. There's the wind that drags itself over branches, and then there's the way silence presses into the shape of whatever you don't want to hear. I kept telling myself the difference. Not real, real, not real. The culvert crouched at the bottom of the ditch, a round grin in the clay. Water moved through it slow as thought. My beam slid across the surface and caught something metallic nestled an inch below, the kind of flash that makes your hand reach before your head gets a vote. I slid down on my heels. Cold slid up through the soles like a reminder. The water smelled iron-rich, old. I reached in. The surface broke with a soft skin sound, and the temperature ran up my sleeve like a wire carrying current. Everything pulled back from everything else. The night inhaled and didn't let go. My radio back in the cab crackled. 2 beats, then my own voice recorded from somewhere I hadn't been yet. Careful. Don't. I closed my fist around the metal, brought it up slow. Not a badge. A backing plate, oval, with the ghost of a Kentucky state crest pressed into it. The pin mounts bent, a faint curve like someone had worn it too long against a heavy chest. Evidence recovered, I heard myself say. Except I didn't say it. My mouth was shut. The words came from behind me, my own cadence flattened thin, the kind of tone you save for forms. They sounded older, tired. I turned so fast, mud swallowed my heel. Small slips. Headlight beams swept the ditch. Mine, not mine. Painting the banks, the culvert mouth, the place where my shadow should have been. The other cruiser sat where the road widened into a turnout. Older body, no plate. Quarter panel branded faint. 214. Dome light still on. Someone inside moving like a still photograph trying to remember motion. I stood there, halfway between what I believed in and what wanted me to. The mantra came on its own. Not real. Real. Not real. I climbed the ditch and took the road's crown, angling toward the driver's side like the academy taught. Keep your body set. Don't silhouette yourself. Read the glass for hands and faces. The dome burned without heat. The cabin fogged from the inside, a film of water beating on the steering wheel. The mic dangled by its curly cord, swaying in air that didn't move. The driver's seat had a depression like someone just stood up. No one stood. State police, I said, professional, steady. If you need assistance, make yourself known. Wind. The locks on that old car thunked in a sequence my bones recognized. Driver, passenger, rear, rear. Each click, clean. No power, no battery hum. Just the ceremony of being let in. I don't break policy for thrill. I do it when the wrong kind of quiet asks a question I can't pretend I didn't hear. Hand on the frame, I leaned and looked. The seat was soaked. I could see my face in the water pooled on the vinyl, not because it was a reflection, but because it knew my face better than I did. My mirrored mouth didn't match my breathing. It formed words slow and polite. Stay in your vehicle. My lips were still. The voice was mine. It carried the gravel of too much coffee, the Kentucky that rounds off the corners of your vowels. It came from the old cruiser's radio then, half a heartbeat late, from the open door of my own. 117, status check. Dispatch. Real. A small lifeline thrown by a woman sitting under fluorescent lights 3 counties away. I moved to key the mic on my shoulder. The mic keyed itself. 117, my voice said flat. Mile 23. Negative contact. A perfect lie, delivered by what I sounded like when I wanted to be believed. I swallowed, felt the swallow in my ears. Not real. Real. Not. A sound cut across the road. Not wind, not water. A bell. The kind you find in one-room churches, rung by a rope in a wooden hand. 3 strikes spaced exact. It came from everywhere. It came from inside my teeth. I backed away slow. The old cruiser's dome clicked off on its own. The windshield fog bled inward and wrote a word I couldn't make myself read. I turned toward my car like a man promising he'll call a number that will only ever ring. My seat took me back. The cab smelled like plastic and cold coffee. I shut the door. The lock caught with a soft, welcoming snick. The radio hissed, then settled. My hands found the wheel like habit could anchor me to something earthbound. 117, I said, voice smaller, rolling a perimeter pass. The GPS box on the dash held at 23.0. I put the car in drive and let the tires crawl. The reflectors along the shoulder watched without shining. The miles trees lifted their thin arms. The odometer ticked 1/10 without the world moving a yard. The radio keyed again, a whisper tucked under static. You again. I wanted to be angry, wanted to be a man with a badge offended by being toyed with, but it felt more like someone recognized me. Not me exactly, the idea of me. A shape that keeps returning to a place that doesn't forget. I eased forward, 50 feet, 70, the same mud ripple, the same leaning reflector post with a divot at its base like a deer had leaned and left. I rolled another 10. The post leaned again, this time on my left. The ditch smiled up or down. The culvert yawned like a story that had decided to eat its listener. I stopped, put it in park. The radio turned itself down to a bare breath of noise. I could hear my heart, slower than it should have been. Everything was slow, as if time were syrup someone had poured and lost the will to clean. Okay, I told no one. Okay. I kept one palm on the wheel, reached for the dashcam controls with the other. The screen showed a still frame of my headlights on the road. Then, a figure stepped between beams and hood, hat brim down, shoulders like mine. He stood half a second before I thought about moving. Then, he didn't stand anymore. The frame skipped. The figure was closer, then closer, then gone. Like someone had cut out every other piece of film and taped what was left into a new sequence where stepping had no in-between. I rewound. The figure's timing changed on the second play. Third, the dashcam didn't show the old cruiser at all. It showed the ditch and the culvert mouth and my own door hanging open, as if the car were keeping its breath for someone else. The mic on my shoulder ticked once, then twice. It keyed. Don't get out, I heard, gentle, tired. I killed the car, killed the lights. The dark in the cab thickened, friendly only to itself. Without the engine's hum, the night grew taller. The passenger door lock slid up with a soft click, no hand on it. The dome came on and didn't wash anything but the idea of space. I looked at the passenger seat. There's a trick the mind does with emptiness. It populates. I didn't see anyone, but I knew where someone would sit if they wanted to. 117, I said to the recorder that might be on and might not be. Note: possible equipment malfunction on dash and radio. Proceeding to manually check culvert for debris and... The sentence didn't like being born. It came half-sized and weak. I opened the door again because the dark outside felt more honest than the light in. Mud took me. The culvert took my beam. The old cruiser decided not to exist where it had decided to. Water in the ditch moved like it remembered a river. I crouched without wanting to. The steel plate in my pocket weighed as much as a promise you don't know you made. A smell rose that wasn't the ditch. Beeswax and singed dust, like the wake of a candle being pinched out. I turned the light toward the trees. Thin trunks stood in an arrangement I didn't recall. Between them, a path I hadn't seen earlier stepped away at a polite angle, like a host drawing a curtain. The lane wasn't there, and then it was, paved with compacted pine needles, just wide enough for a person who knew they were expected. I knew better. I went anyway. Sure. My breath got louder. The sound didn't ring in my ears. It came back delayed from ahead of me, like someone down the path was matching it a half-step later. The path bent once, then twice, and brought me to a small clearing with a cabin I would have sworn wasn't there 10 minutes earlier. Cinder block piers, plank porch. A door half-proportioned and centered like it was ashamed of itself. On a small table, a typewriter sat hunched. The old kind. The kind that requires you to choose each letter hard. A sheet was threaded clean. D. A second. E. I watched the letters climb the page like ants. My name began without asking. Not the one from my badge, the one my father used when he wanted me to sit up and listen. The machine wrote it out full as if it had known it all along. I took a step. The type bars stilled like I'd surprised it. The ribbon smelled faintly metallic. I came closer. The paper wasn't blank beneath. Pressed into its fibers were other letters, reversed, as if something had leaned a page against a page for too long. I read what the page wanted to be if someone else hadn't gotten there first. Stay in your vehicle. My throat closed. I let out a small noise that wanted to be a laugh, and wasn't. Not real. Real. Not real. The door opened behind the machine an inch and no more. No hand, no draft. The room beyond was dark in a way that felt busy. I could sense the shape of a mirror the way you sense someone standing behind you on a day the sun is bright enough to make their heat touch your back. You don't step into a stranger's cabin in the woods on a mile where your radio speaks in your own voice like a parrot that built itself. You don't. But I'm telling this because I did. I reached for the door and set my palm on wood that felt warm. Not heated. Warm like breath. I pushed. Inside was a cot, a shelf with canning jars faintly backlit by nothing, a floorboard polished by feet and fear. Against the far wall, a gilt frame big enough for 2 men to drown in stood leaning. The mirror didn't show the room I stood in. It showed a nave, pews, candles, whitewashed walls. The kind of small church the state forgets except when it needs its people to be quiet. It showed a pulpit with a book and a hand on that book that looked a lot like mine. My reflection stepped into the pulpit before I did. His mouth formed a word it wanted me to hear in the quiet little place where I held my father's voice. Welcome. The jars on the shelf wore labels floated up from syrup, surnames I knew from old files. A few I didn't. One caught the light in a way that made me see my own letters arranged backwards on a curl of paper drowned in sweet. I moved toward it with a care I reserve for bomb calls and nursery rooms. "Don't," my voice said. From the mirror, from the radio, from the place my mouth would make that shape if it had been used by someone else long enough to consider itself furniture. I froze and felt foolish for freezing, and then forgave myself out loud because I needed the sound of my forgiveness to be real. "Evidence," I murmured. "Collect later." The typewriter on the porch struck a key by itself like a heart deciding not to stop. Single key, ding, then again, then a line-end ring I felt behind my eyes. In the mirror, the church doors opened without hands. A congregation sat quiet as wax. Every hat brim pulled down enough to be neighborly. No faces until one faced. The face was mine, tired, kind, softer than I let myself be. It smiled the way a man smiles for children when he knows something they don't and doesn't have the heart to tell it. I took one step backward, then another, until the cabin was around me again and the mirror was just a heavy thing pretending to show light. My breath came late. The door swung shut softly like it was sorry and needed to sleep. Outside, the path had arranged itself into a version that didn't include the way I'd come. I followed the only direction left, like you follow a voice down a hallway at the station when you're new and want to look like you belong. The trees opened, and the road waited, and the culvert smiled, and my cruiser idled, and the old cruiser was not, and my radio keyed itself like it had decided to be helpful. 117, it said. My tongue, my teeth, my tired. Advancing against better judgment. I slid into the seat and pulled the door shut very gently so the night wouldn't think I was angry. The lock seated. The wheel fit my hands. I looked in the rear view out of whatever curiosity survived my training. The mirror blinked independent of me. I tucked the metal backing plate into an evidence bag I'd had the sense to glove, closed the bag, sealed the seal, wrote with a marker that didn't want to write on cold plastic. MM23, plate, found. My handwriting looked like my father's. It always has, I thought, and then hoped I hadn't thought it too loudly. "Dispatch," I said out loud. 117, continuing. "Copy," the air said, and then softer, the woman who had said "you" again, once said it once more, like a neighbor seeing you on another morning no one had ordered. "You again." Sleep isn't something you get on some miles. You borrow it, and it charges interest. I didn't sleep. I posted up where the shoulder widens and watched my own headlights paint the same bark different ways. When my eyes closed, I made them open. When my hands wanted to leave the wheel, I asked them politely to stay. At 3:17 by the watch that had belonged to a man who taught me how to shine boots and not much else, the bell struck. Once. Twice. Thrice. The radio came alive without choosing between alive and not. "Unit 214, it announced in a dispatch voice from a year that kept pretending it wasn't over. Then my call sign. Then a sequence that felt like a prayer. Stay, vehicle. Stay, vehicle. Each piece rearranged itself until it made a sentence that could keep something where it was. "Copy," I said, because there are times when no is just a sound you make to entertain yourself. The GPS still read 23.0. The odometer had donated 2 more tenths to nobody's journey. I put the car into drive. It felt like easing a coffin forward only to find it already at the grave. I moved 50 feet and found the turnout where the old cruiser always was when it wanted to be. I took the other way, the way that wasn't a way, an hour earlier. Trees slid aside. The road put on a new face. I followed it because it had manners. The beams found a white shape in the dark ahead that was not fog. A building where there shouldn't have been time to build. A one-room church, fresh painted in moonlight, the color of a healed bruise. No sign, no number. Just a door and a pane of glass whose reflection wanted my attention. I stopped and let the engine idle. My breath fogged the windshield. The pain fogged itself from the inside. I stepped out. The door waited. It was a door that had never learned to slam. I put my hand on its handle and felt nothing but the small warmth things get from being touched. Inside smelled like beeswax and old hymnals and something like formaldehyde pretending to be sugar. Candles burned invisible. The air carried a hum like electricity in a wall in a house you don't own. They were there, rows of them. Sunday clothes, heads bowed, hands folded. Faces hidden under brim and veil until the moment my light tried to find them. Then they lifted their chins together like strings pulled. Every face was mine. Not real. Real. Not real. The words had never done me any harm before. Now they didn't know which job to do. At the front, the pulpit. At the pulpit, the preacher. His hat was mine. His shoulders were mine. His voice, when it decided to answer the question I hadn't found a way to ask, carried my father's patience. "Welcome home," he said. And it was kind, and that made it worse. I couldn't say my father's name. I couldn't say mine. I could only say the job. "Sheriff's office," I heard myself inform the empty that had become full. "Identify yourself." They did. Every mouth in every pew shaped my name without sound. The thing in the pulpit gave a small nod as if I'd arrived in time for something I'd missed, and it was grateful I'd come anyway. Behind the voice and the heat and my breath, a rhythm started again. 3 knocks, pause, 3, pause, 3. You can argue with words. You can't argue with numbers. I backed up a step, then another, then all the way out into air that tasted like iron filings and pine. The road stood there like a friend whose advice you never take until it's too late. My cruiser made the sound a cruiser makes when a man sits in it and asks it to behave. I slid behind the wheel and let the door close itself. The lock found its home. The mirror watched me watch it. "Not real," I said. Quiet. The radio waited 2 beats and then repeated me in my father's steadiness. Real. I put the car in reverse and began to back straight the way I was taught. Eyes forward, hands steady, no checking mirrors. Don't let the wheel half turn itself because your fear thinks maybe you should just glance. The world didn't change. The mile marker didn't change. The numbers on the dash came from a place that counted differently. The bell was very polite about keeping time. And because I am telling this like a confession and not a report, I'll give you this. You can back out of a thing if you don't let it see your face. You can reverse your way to a moment where dawn is honest and the radio only belongs to one day at a time. You can. Once. Or you can think you did. The path unfurled behind me like ribbon pulled from a box, gravel under tires. My breath remained mine. The culvert held still. The leaning reflector stood where it had leaned. I felt the car's rear tires meet proper pavement like a hand finding another in the dark. I stopped. Put it in park. Let go of the wheel. The radio keyed. A voice that had practiced me until it loved me said, soft enough to feel like advice, "Don't turn around." I didn't. I kept my hands on the wheel at 10 and 2. I looked at a road that led away from something that likes to keep. In the glass over my shoulder where a man looks to make sure he hasn't left anyone behind, I saw nothing because I didn't look. That was the first time I thought I'd left mile marker 23. It was not the last time I learned otherwise. Sun came up without changing the light. It just announced itself. The sky stayed the same thin gray, like the world had remembered the idea of morning, but couldn't carry the weight. I sat with both hands on the wheel until my fingers stopped arguing about whether to let go. Then clicked the recorder on and made my voice do the job I was trained for. Unit 117. Time 0713. Location: Highway 90 spur near mile 23. Evidence log follows. I bagged the backing plate again, as if sealing it twice might convince the day that last night had a border. The plastic crinkled like frost. I wrote slower this time. M23. Plate. Found. The marker's tip dragged as if the letters had to move through something denser than air. I set the bag on the passenger seat and watched it sit there like it was practicing being ordinary. The radio gave me nothing but low hiss. No you again. No stay in your vehicle. No borrowed voice from a dead trooper or the living version of me. The dashcam woke to life in sleepy blue. I scrolled last night's footage because procedure is a rope you can throw into a well, even if you already know the well doesn't have a bottom. The screen showed my headlights, the ditch, the culvert, the empty road. I fast-forwarded. At 3:17, the picture broke into static and reorganized itself into the church's doorway. Not the way my headlights had seen it, the way a person standing inside might. The nave, full and bright. A hand, my hand, rested on the pulpit. The frame held for 5 seconds longer than felt decent. I scrubbed back, hit pause, zoomed with fingers that wanted to shake and pretended not to. The ring on the hand was mine, small scratch on the band where it caught on the evidence locker once. But the skin looked older. The veins were higher. There was a shine on the knuckles like heat had been there a long time. 117, I said out loud, as if making it a note could put it in a box. Dashcam appears to be pulling external visual not visible to current position. My voice couldn't find a neutral word for haunted. I put the car in drive. The odometer added 1/10 I hadn't earned. I rolled forward 10 yards. The mile marker leaned like a man who'd been waiting for a ride and changed his mind. I rolled another 10, and the shoulder flare I'd left last month to mark a sinkhole lay at the exact same angle I remembered placing it. Only the plastic looked newer. Déjà vu is a kind of weather in places like this that makes your bones feel damp. The culvert crouched exactly where it always would. The ditch water moved like it knew a bell schedule. I stepped out. The air outside bit like aluminum on the tongue. Perimeter pass, I told the recorder, because if I didn't talk, I'd hear breathing behind me that wasn't mine. Distance irregularities present. GPS fixed at 23.0. The backing plate in its bag felt warm now. Not hot, but not the temperature of a thing that had slept in my cruiser all night. I checked the bag's seal, because that's what you do when a problem won't say what it is. The edges held fine. The evidence tag kept looking like my father's handwriting had come to help. I angled my light at the plate and saw something I didn't last night, a faint line of scratches along the back rim. Not letters, grooves like counting marks a bored man might make with a nail. 23 of them, grouped in threes, except the last group only had 2. I counted twice, then a third time. The number didn't change. Numbers don't care about you. I turned the plate over. Along the inside curve, barely visible under tarnish, someone had etched a badge number with the patience of a man who doesn't plan to die while doing it. It wasn't Bishop's. It was mine. The breath I took didn't belong to me for a second. It belonged to a future version who'd already seen this. He didn't panic. He didn't shout. He just let the truth take its seat like a tired man at a town meeting. Not real. Real. Not real. The forest agreed by saying nothing. I put the plate away, sealed it again as if that meant anything, and followed the shoulder line to where the path had opened last night. A politeness in the trees that allowed a man to believe he'd been invited. It wasn't there. Instead, the pines had turned their ribs toward each other like shoulders in a family photograph. But 30 feet farther down, another seam waited. If you looked straight at it, it vanished. If you kept it in the corner of your eye, it stayed. I walked without announcing the decision to myself so my fear wouldn't get the chance to argue. The air under the boughs carried a sweetness, like beeswax or syrup cooked too long. The path bowed and then straightened. It put the cabin where the cabin needed to be, in a clearing that seemed to have been set down minutes ago by a careful hand. The porch had aged a decade overnight, boards gray and cupped, rust on the hinge. A scorch along the roofline I would have bet wasn't there when I left. On the little table, the typewriter crouched like it had spent the night listening. Beside it, a reel-to-reel recorder the department retired before I earned my badge. It wore a paper label in my handwriting. Playback. Slow. A key rose and fell by itself. One letter, then another. EVIDENCELOG. Unit 117, I heard myself say from somewhere too close to be outside my mouth. Time 0713. Location Highway 90 spur near mile 23. Evidence log follows. The machine typed along with me. It wound my words onto the page 3 letters ahead, like it was out in front clearing a path. I didn't say that, I told it quietly. It typed it anyway. I heard myself answer from the reel-to-reel. I pressed play before my hands could make the better decision. My voice filled the cold morning exactly as I'd just spoken it, only a breath flatter, as if copied too many times. It carried every small imperfection I wished I didn't have. Then it continued past the part I'd finished. Backing plate recovered shows badge number consistent with mine. I stopped the tape with a finger that hit the switch too hard. The typewriter struck a key in mild reproach. I waited. Nothing else moved. Even the wind seemed to reread what had been written. 117, I said, voice making a note so it wouldn't have to make a confession. Recording shows predictive content of unknown origin. Possible equipment contamination. Possible mimicry. The reel-to-reel clicked on by itself. A different voice came through. Same timbre, same rasp from too much coffee, but deeper with years. Possible acceptance, it said gently. You did good work, son. Through reflection. The words landed on the back of my neck like a father's hand when you're 8 and don't know if you're in trouble. The tape didn't hiss. It breathed. Dad? I asked the morning, which is not a question a man in uniform should ever put on official audio. No answer. Just a low, steady, static hum under everything, like the parish lines of another state had bled under the map here. I went inside because running wasn't going to get me anywhere but back to the road. and the road had opinions about who belonged to it. The cabin's cot had collected a thin pellicle of ash, as if something long ago had burned polite enough to keep its smoke to itself. On the shelf, the jars floated names in syrup that glowed without light. The mirror was gone. In its place, a rectangle of darker wall where a heavy thing had leaned for years, the ghost of weight. I stepped closer to the empty. It reflected nothing, and reflected me anyway. "Sheriff's office," I said to a room that wasn't a room. "Identify yourself." The answer came from outside on the porch, my voice on the reel. "Identified." I stepped back into air that had cooled a degree. The typewriter held a new page. My name had been typed at the top, full and formal. The line below it waited. When I didn't speak, it didn't either. When I reached to pull the paper, the carriage resisted like a dog who knows the walk isn't over. "Not real. Real. Not real." The machine typed the mantra out for me, letter by letter, as if pleased to have something we could agree on. I left before it could finish the last period. Back at the shoulder, the road pretended to lack opinions. The cruiser pretended to be a tool. I slid in and the seat remembered me. The backing plate in the bag ticked once, plastic making noise nothing had told it to. I put my hand on it, palm flat through evidence, the way you do for a hurt animal you can't fix. 117, I said to dispatch, because a sane voice can be a bridge. "Show me still in the area." Silence. The long kind. Then the faintest Samantha from third shift shape inside the hiss, speaking like she didn't want to wake anyone. "Copy." Only it wasn't quite her. It was someone who had listened to her long enough to learn her kindness and could imitate its shape. I decided to stay moving. It feels like protection sometimes. I rolled to the turnout, put the car in park, stared into the trees and tried to believe the lean of the mile marker had changed because wind had done it. That's when the reflection in the rearview smiled again. Only this time it didn't wait for me. It lifted a hand first, slow, patient, then centered on an invisible pulpit and bowed its head like a man beginning grace. I turned the mirror up until it showed me only roofliner. It felt juvenile, like covering your eyes with your palms in a room where the monster has excellent hearing. But I did it anyway. The radio keyed in a whisper. "You again." I nodded, like that could be an answer to a thing that lives on loops. "Me again." By afternoon, which stayed the same color as morning, the mile had settled into its rhythm. Move and get nowhere. Stop and be seen. The dash cam recorded things I hadn't walked through yet. The GPS read 23.0 like a grave marker. My stomach made sounds as if hunger could serve as proof of time. I took the plate out of the bag again against my better judgment and held it to the light. The scratches around the rim had grown. Not longer, just deeper. The groups of 3 looked freshly cut. There were still 23 marks. Now the last group had 3. I put it away carefully and didn't say anything out loud. A shimmer at the edge of the windshield drew my eye the way blood draws flies. Down the spur, pale and wavering, the old cruiser bled into existence, slow enough to be polite about it. It wore my current plate now, the bolts brighter than they had any right to be. The quarter panel number still read 214 under flaked paint, but the sticker on the bumper, little fraternal badge our district gives out, was last quarter's version. It hadn't existed in 1998 when Bishop vanished. I rolled forward without intending to. The other car matched my crawl like a reflection in a shop window you approach without meaning to. We closed the distance to a hand's breadth and stopped. "Identify yourself," I said. Not because I believed it would help, but because not saying it would have been a kind of surrender. My voice came back from two radios at once, the one in his dash, the one in mine, overlaying, out of phase. "Identify yourself." The delay wasn't the same as last night. Sometimes it came early, by a sliver, and sometimes late. Then both voices overlapped in perfect time for a single word, as if we'd agreed to meet there. "Sheriff." The dome in the other car came on. The cabin fogged. The driver's seat held an impression more defined than water could manage. There were creases where knees had settled, finally, after a long drive. A hat hung from the mirror, spinning the way things spin in a room without air. I reached for my mic without looking away. My thumb found the switch. I pressed it down like you press a crucifix to your chest in a house, not yours. "Dispatch Unit 117, active scene with possible..." The mic crackled in my hand and spoke before me. "Possible duplication." The word duplication tasted wrong in my mouth until I realized it was true. The other cruiser's light bar flickered once. In the brief wash, I saw everything twice. The road, the trees, me. The second me turned his head a fraction faster. He smiled a not unkind smile. I stepped out. The air had changed temperature by a degree or two in a way my skin noticed and my brain misnamed. I moved left and kept my body angled. The old habits feel good when the world refuses to comply. It's nice to be useful to yourself. At 5 paces, I could make out an object on the other car's dashboard I hadn't noticed before. A stack of photographs in a rubber band. They were damp around the edges in a way that said they'd learn mold if you let them. I reached through the open window with gloved fingers and slid the stack toward me just enough to free the top one. The first photo showed the church as it must have been when the paint was still drying. White clapboard, cross true, sky unbothered. The congregation stood in their best, lined up as if for a fair. Their eyes had been gouged out with something blunt, not to hide them, but to make the faces empty. I slid to the second photo, a choir boy in a stiff collar, almost whistling. The scratches across his mouth bent his smile into a shape between prayer and warning. The third showed a man in a brimmed hat at the church door, broad shoulders, a stance I'd seen every time I watched myself walk past a shop window. My eyes in the photo were intact. They were the only eyes left in the stack that were. A laugh came out of me the way a hiccup does, uninvited and a little painful. Not real. Real. Not. Something inside the other car moved across the glass like breath. It wrote a word, none of the letters of which I wanted to read. I put the photos back in the band and slid them onto the dash with more care than they deserved. The radio in my car spoke in plural. "We are tired." I turned very slowly to find myself in the driver's window of my own cruiser. My face where my face should be, except my mouth was moving when mine wasn't. It shaped 2 words as lovingly as a father says a name. Welcome home. The sky did that dimming thing light does when a storm decides not to happen anyway. I got back behind the wheel because forward is sometimes the only way a man knows how to go, even if forward is just a loop with manners. I put the car in drive. The other cruiser put itself in reverse. We moved away from each other without losing any distance. The type of math that eats men for breakfast. 117, the radio whispered. "Crossing parish line now." "That's not our word," I said, more to be right than to be safe. "Now, the other voice said, and the words sounded like a bell. The trees shifted like living furniture. The path that hadn't been there made itself visible in the corner of my eye. The church sat at the end of it, pale and expectant, like it had been painted yesterday by hands that loved it. The door was open. The glass in the pane only reflected me when I didn't look directly at it. I killed the engine because I wanted to be able to hear my fear coming. I stepped out and stood very still for 6 counts. Then I went in. Inside, the pews were full again, the hats lifted in unison. The faces were mine, and then for a slice of a second they weren't. They were my father's, and then Bishop's, and then men I didn't know who looked like me in ways that had nothing to do with blood. At the pulpit, the reflection that wore my mouth waited until I had the decency to arrive, then nodded like a pastor who knows you by your first name and your sins. "You've done good work," he said softly, and it was the voice that taught me how to tie a tie badly and how to shoot well. Through reflection. "What are you?" I asked, and hated how small the question sounded. He tilted his head. "You." The congregation breathed in once, all together. The sound was like pages turning. The air thickened to syrup. The floorboards gave under the weight of water coming up from a place that wasn't ground. Reflections bloomed across the surface like oil. They turned their heads before I did. They smiled when I needed them not to. "Not real," I said. "Real," they answered, in my father's patience. I didn't run. Running gets you nowhere but mile 23. I backed away, out the door that would not slam, into the kind of daylight that refuses to prove itself. In the cab, the radio repeated a line I knew would come to own me. "Dispatch, this is 117, crossing parish line now." "That's me," I said, quiet as you talk to the cradle where your first child is asleep. The radio obliged with 2 words it had been saving. "You again." I sat there with my hands around the wheel until my grip left crescents in the skin. When the bell rang, 1, 2, 3, I didn't look back. I put the car into reverse and began to back out of a road that knows how to keep. The GPS stayed where it loved to be. The odometer comforted itself with numbers. The mile marker watched with the impoliteness of a friend who tells you the truth. The morning refused to end. "Not real, real, not real," I said, and I meant all 3. The radio recorded me like a man with a typewriter taking dictation from a story that had already been told. The moment I said, "That's me," every sound on the band answered back. Not one echo, a whole patrol of them. My voice, Bishop's voice, voices with my drawl and without it, each one a half-second apart like a round sung by ghosts that still keep time. It filled the cab until the air itself vibrated. The windshield fogged from both sides. I wiped it with my sleeve and the condensation drew new letters before I finished. "Stay in your vehicle." "Too late," I said, and the words came back in stereo, one alive, one archived. The headlights of the other cruiser, the one with my plate, flared white, and when they dimmed, there were more of them behind it. Rows of cars shoulder to shoulder, all KSP models from different years. 98 Crown Vic, 07 Charger, 14 Interceptor. Bodies overlapping like exposures on bad film. Their light bars pulsed out of rhythm, washing the trees red to blue to white to dark. The forest didn't move anymore. It breathed. You could feel the exhale in the mud under your boots, a slow heartbeat the size of the county. I stepped out because sitting still felt worse. 117 on scene, I told the recorder, though I didn't check if it was even on. Multiple units visible. Request verification on active officers. The radio answered in a dozen of me. Verified. Then, stay where you are. Then, a whisper so thin it almost wasn't. We are where you are. The culvert below the road began to hum. Not water, not wind. A tone right between heartbeat and dial tone. The ditch glowed faintly, silver bubbles breaking the surface and hissing into letters that didn't survive the air. I leaned over the guardrail. Light rose from under the water, shaped like words trying to remember grammar. Every patrol car in the line keyed its radio at once. The pop, the breath, the click. And the chorus said my name. Each syllable arrived heavier, slower, until it wasn't a name anymore but a weight. I climbed down the bank because pretending not to was worse. Cold seeped through the soles, through the skin, through the bones built for roads and not for rivers. The air tasted like a copper penny under your tongue. In the glow, the water was no longer water. It was film. Layers of faces drifting just beneath the surface, uniforms rippling like they were still standing at attention. Bishop first, then men I never met, then my own face, eyes open, mouth moving with the patience of a man underwater too long to care. Help me, I meant to say. What came out was, copy. The reflection of my hand reached back, got the timing wrong by half a breath, and grabbed my wrist. Cold, but solid. The kind of strength that doesn't belong to fear. I tried to pull away, but the current wasn't current. It was intent. Something climbed up through my arm, memory or electricity, and filled my head with radio traffic from decades I'd never patrolled. Unit 117, copy. Unit 214 on scene. 10 to 50 unknown. 10 to 60 possible officer down. Voices layering, drowning each other, never stopping for confirmation. I saw it then. The loop itself. Each cruiser arriving, each trooper calling it in, each voice folded into the next until the mile was nothing but an archive of men who couldn't stop doing their job. The hand let go. The water went still. The glow shrank to one thin line like a horizon drawn wrong. I climbed back up, shaking without cold. The road had changed its mind again. Where there'd been one car, there were 5, all idling without engines. Their windows mirrored back the same scene, me standing, looking, me standing, looking, stacked infinity deep. The nearest mirror twitched. My reflection blinked late, then smiled like a man relieved to see me finally understand. He wore Bishop's uniform. The patch on the sleeve still said 214. I reached for his mic. I heard the click before I saw it. "Dispatch, this is 214, he said, in my voice. "Copy, Unit 117 on scene." Then he looked up, eyes bright as signal lights. "You're early." I tried to speak, but my throat stayed closed, like the body knew better than the mind. He tilted his head the way I did when I didn't want to argue with my sergeant. Then he stepped backward into the glare and was gone, the uniform peeling to light. The radios died, all of them. The silence afterward wasn't empty, it was full, a packed room hush. A breath, held by the world, waiting for the next cue. "Not real," I whispered. Real. Not real. The mantra didn't work anymore. It was part of their script now. Each repetition came back through the speakers, layered until it sounded like thunder shaped into words. I walked to my cruiser on autopilot. The dashlight flickered on, steady, steady. Heartbeat steady. I sat down and looked at my reflection in the rear view. The badge on my chest read 214. I laughed once, a dry snap of sound. Well, I told whoever's been keeping minutes. Guess it's my turn to answer the call. The mic keyed itself in agreement. Copy that, it said, softer than a whisper. Welcome to the Loop. Chapter 29. Top to the Loop by El America. It's still as well as it. The tremo is the dealing with the elevation of self. Count out. The nameplate on my chest said Bishop H. now, clear as if someone had polished it. The reflection in the glass smiled back with my own teeth and a stranger's patience. I turned the dashcam toward me. Unit 117, I said quietly. Personal log continuation. Possible identity contamination. Requesting dispatch confirmation of active units in sector. Soft, layered voices overlapping. 1-7. Copy, Bishop. Stay in your vehicle. I swallowed the lump in my throat because fear tastes the same as faith if you hold it long enough. Dispatch, I said again. Confirm. What's my call sign? Then, like a mother coaxing the child to finish his homework. You know who you are, sweetheart. That wasn't my dispatcher. That wasn't anyone. I killed the mic. Didn't matter. The speaker kept breathing static like it had lungs. Outside, the row of patrol cars began to blur around the edges. Their light bars flashed red, blue, but there was no rhythm anymore, only color. Each beam cut through me instead of past me, and I saw faces in the wash. 100 troopers, their mouths moving in sync to a language that sounded like every radio code we'd ever used, spoken backwards. 10-8, one voice whispered. 1077. 1099. I didn't realize until later those were the same codes for in-service, request backup, and officer down. I got out again because the cruiser had started to feel like a coffin with air conditioning. The sky overhead had gone colorless, clouds hung too low, and every tree leaned slightly toward the road, as if listening for something about to break. I started walking, boots heavy with mud. Every step echoed, not in air, but ahead of me, half a second early. The echo's footsteps didn't fade. They waited for mine to catch up. I followed them. The four-step opened back into the same clearing with the same church that shouldn't still be standing. Only now the door was wide open, and the bell over the gable swung slow with no wind. Inside, the pews were empty. The air smelled like iron filings and candle smoke long gone. I walked down the aisle because the silence asked politely. At the pulpit, the old radio, Bishop's radio, rested where a Bible should have been. I lifted the mic. The cord snaked across the floor like it was still alive. Dispatch, I said, voice trembling. This is Unit 117, reporting from mile marker 23. I believe. This is Unit 117, another version of my voice said at the same time, perfectly synced. Reporting from mile marker 23. I believe. I froze. The radio had anticipated me word for word. That I am no longer outside the call, the other me finished. I dropped the mic like it burned. It landed upright, still transmitting. On the other end, I could hear someone moving around the cabin. Bootsteps, booting, pages turning. But I wasn't moving. I looked down, and the floor reflected me like a puddle, except the reflection was standing. He lifted his head slowly, eyes empty but knowing. He smiled with that same gentle tiredness I'd seen in the church before. 100 low voices whispered together. Every call stays open. Every mile keeps who it needs.
I backed away, hit the doorframe hard, stumbled out into the cold light that wasn't day or night anymore. The reflection followed me in the window's glare until the glass gave up trying to separate us. The bell rang once. Twice. 3 times. Each strike echoed with delay, stacking behind me. When the last ring faded, the forest was gone. The road stretched forever both directions. No horizon, no curve. Just infinite asphalt broken only by the white stutter of the same number painted again and again. 23. 23. 23. I walked to my cruiser, or a cruiser, and climbed in. The interior smelled of ozone and river water. The badge number on the dash read 214 again. The GPS blinked 23.0. The clock rolled over to 00 and stayed there. Unit 117, I whispered, because the words felt like home. But when I looked at the reflection in the window, his lips didn't match. He said, Unit 214. I pressed record on the dash mic. The red light blinked once, then twice, then stayed on solid. This is Unit 117, I said, and for the first time, I felt like I was talking to someone other than myself. I'm reporting from mile marker 23. Possible contamination of time, memory, and identity. If you hear this, do not stop. Do not stop the car. I hesitated. The other me's voice continued, calm, older. If you stop, it learns your cadence. It practices until it sounds just like you. Then it waits for the next trooper to come. Who are you? I whispered. I'm you, the voice said, as though explaining gravity to a child. The version that didn't listen. The one that stayed too long. The dash light dimmed, and I saw myself reflected in every gauge, speedometer, tachometer, clock, all showing 0. Each reflection moved a little ahead of me, a little faster. Each had a badge that wasn't mine. I pressed my palms to my face. Cold skin, dry eyes. I laughed, quietly, because what else can you do? Not real. Real. Not real. The radio sighed, the way dispatchers do when they've heard it all. Reality's just signal strength, sweetheart. You fade far enough out and the static does the rest. Static hums stronger now, pulsing like a heartbeat. The road ahead began to move under the tires, though I hadn't touched the ignition. The speedometer climbed. 5, 10, 23. The GPS stayed still. Through the windshield, the horizon melted into light, and in that light, 100 silhouettes of troopers stood shoulder to shoulder, every one holding a radio to their lips, every one mouthing the same phrase. Stay in your vehicle. My throat closed around air that wanted out. I whispered back. Too late. The dashcam turned on by itself. The red light blinked. The radio keyed one last time. This is 117, reporting from mile 23. If you hear me, stay in your vehicle. The last thing I heard before everything went perfectly still was my own voice on a delay, half a second behind, saying, Copy. Whatever. It found out, audio log, recovered from a Kentucky State Police evidence locker, tagged MM23, restricted. The recording begins mid-sentence, timestamp unreadable. No lights, no moon, just that same mile repeating. I kept the car in reverse until the trees started to look different. Didn't check the mirrors. didn't breathe unless I had to. And then, somehow, I was home. I don't know if home's the right word. The coffee pot was still warm when I walked in, but I haven't made coffee in 3 days. The house smelled like rain, though it hasn't rained since I left. I can hear the highway from my window sometimes, except there isn't one anywhere near here. He exhales, slow. You can hear a faint, rhythmic clicking, like a turn signal that refuses to shut off. I filed what I could. Turned in the evidence plate, the dash cam, my statement. Told the captain it was interference, maybe a prank, maybe an old analog repeater ghosting old transmissions. He nodded like he believed me, but he doesn't drive past mile marker 23. None of them do. They send rookies instead. They say, if you stop there long enough, you start to hear your own name before you speak it. That it's the road talking back, rehearsing. Maybe that's all this place ever was. A practice ground for echoes. I spend with it. I keep a journal now. Not police issue, just a cheap one from the gas station. Sometimes when I open it, there are new entries written in my handwriting. Dates I don't remember living through. They all end the same way. They all end with, stay in your vehicle. You ever wonder what a voice really is? It's not just air, it's vibration, it's touch, invisible. Maybe that's why the road keeps us. It likes the way we sound. The evidence plate came back from forensics yesterday. They said the badge number was filed down clean. No trace of engraving, no scratches, no heat damage, just smooth metal. But I've seen it. I've felt my number there. Dispatch? The voice breaks into static, thin, fragile. Dispatch, this is 117. Status check. No answer. Only a low echo buried deep in the hiss. This is 117. Crossing parish line now. He lets out a sound that could be a laugh or a sob. I've been hearing that on playback every time I record. It doesn't matter if the mic's off, it just finds a way in. Sometimes it answers questions I haven't asked yet. I think about Bishop sometimes. How the report said he went missing, not dead. Missing leaves the door open, you know? Leaves a place for the voice to come back through. He pauses. The tape catches a faint sound behind him, a soft double tap against glass. So, doesn't turn, his breathing stutters once. Yeah, it knocks sometimes. 3 times if I've been talking too long. I should stop recording, but I can't. Feels like if I keep talking, it stays inside the tape. If I stop, it'll move into the room. Low-frequency pulse building under it. You ever notice how static isn't empty? It's everything talking at once. All the signals layered until they sound like silence. That's what the mile is. A pile of voices, waiting to be mistaken for nothing. A new voice enters, soft, familiar, calm. Dispatch to Unit 214, do you copy? He freezes. That's not my number, he whispers. The radio replies, smooth and patient. It is now. The recorder picks up a long exhale. A chair leg scrapes, then falls. Paper rustles, pages flipping backward by themselves. One last sound. The metallic tap of something small sliding onto the desk. He speaks again, very close to the mic now, voice hollowed by realization. The plate's warm again. It says 214. Always did. I I just couldn't see it till now. Listen, if you're hearing this, you're already too close. It doesn't care about roads or states. It follows signal, and you're the receiver now. And it's already knows you again. Believe me, do you? The tone holds, thin as a wire before fading into nothing. Then after 20 seconds of silence, a new voice, identical to his, keys in, calm and procedural. Dispatch, this is 117, crossing parish line now. Repeat, crossing parish line now. Silence. End of recording. File renamed automatically by system. Echo 214.mp3.